Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today I'll be reviewing the new self-titled album from Racing Mount Pleasant, which is the second album from the American rock band who, despite being a band from the US, are displaying quite a lot of influence from the windmill scene over in the UK, even already solidifying themselves as one of the most prominent bands in the scene, if you can really even say that. They released their debut album, Grip Your Fist, I'm Heaven Bound, back in 2022 under the name Kingfisher, and with that album they were already showing a hell of a lot of promise, just again with their very prominent influence from the windmill scene, especially bands like Black Country New Road. And despite my enjoyment of that album, I think overall I just found it to be a little bit rough around the edges, but definitely showed the band displaying a lot of potential. And I think that now on their new self-titled album, so much of that potential is finally being used. There are many elements that go into my enjoyment of this album, mostly just the more actualized version of the vision they had on their first album. Most notably with this album being substantially longer, which I think just gives them so much more time to explore all of the ideas they really want to, as well as the fact that I just find the performances on this project too to be so much more passionate and emotive than before. Like I've already mentioned, with that very Black Country New Road inspired style. But despite that being so prominent, I don't think it's done in a way that makes it feel that unoriginal or cheesy, with the band absolutely still having their own sense of identity despite their very prominent influences. I do love the way this album opens with Your New Place, showcasing this incredible vibe and atmosphere, which is something that is consistently one of my favorite aspects of the whole album, just with it being such a big focus throughout. I love how soft this track starts, but then eventually going into this very epic and triumphant climax, whereby they are already proving my point as to how Black Country New Road influenced this album is. I also love how the song is already displaying how fantastic of a vocalist the frontman Sam Dubose is, just with the insane amount of passion in his voice really sounding like he's just on the brink of a mental breakdown at any second. I really love the group vocals on 10-speed Shallows, with each element of it just feeling equally important. I think overall this track does just kind of feel like a more straightforward version of the opening song, but given how intense this album has already been, I think it actually works perfectly. But despite that, I think there's still so much amazing stuff happening on this track. In particular, just the build-up and the way it creates tension, I think is amazing. And despite it not having this epic big release, I think that it still manages to build up in a way that is still just as satisfying. Heavy Red is then just a pretty simple and straightforward folk interlude that obviously does have that very kind of sad and introspective tone, which is, like I've said, present on most of the album. However, I think with the more acoustic-oriented sound, I think fits in really well, just with how there's very little acoustic focus on this album, with this song just being one of a handful of moments that really have a much more simple arrangement of instruments. And so because of that, I think that these moments, while used sparingly, always sound really good whenever they are there, just to kind of provide a little bit of a break from the much bigger and more intense sounds that are present on the rest of the album. And then you have Emily, which I think is a really beautiful and very quiet song with this big emphasis on subtlety. I love the very soft and low-key guitar playing on this track, which just provides the song with a very melancholic tone, which I think is also helped by the much more sparse usage of the brass instruments. But despite that very quiet and introspective feeling introduction to the song, towards the end it then goes back to that more Black Country New Road-esque kind of sound, just with the insane amount of passion and intensity with every instrument that is playing. And then I do really like the song Seminary for just being so much more simple and laid back, just with so much less of an emphasis on these big build-ups or epic emotional climaxes. The much more low-key writing, as well as just the incredible atmosphere, I think is where the song really shines, just as it takes you on a much more slow and progressive journey to just really explore every single sound that's going on. And then You is a song that takes that even further, and I absolutely love that about it. Again, without there being all that much sense of a progression, and instead just focusing on a much more simple guitar and vocals based track. However, just the very brief appearances from other instruments I think all are used incredibly well, just with each one providing that extra little bit of depth to the song, just while the vocals and guitar do all the heavy lifting. And then You Part 2 follows on just about as well as you would expect, although I find that on the Part 2 of this song there is much more of an emphasis on the atmosphere, and I think that there just being so much more depth to this one. And then going into the latter half of the song, it does then take it into a more climax-oriented structure, and then just as you would expect from the band, builds up into this absolutely amazing moment, with there obviously just being so much passion and emotion on display. Then after such an epic climax following the much more acoustic break of the album, the title track then continues that cutting to the chase pretty much immediately, just opening straight away with this very fast and punchy build-up that does showcase this track's very unconventional structure in terms of just the way it progresses to its climax, which is still something that I absolutely love given how unpredictable it is, but it still manages to create something very satisfying. And as well, there is still this big emphasis on the atmosphere, despite it being so much more loud and epic than before. And I also just love how powerful and intense the instrumentation can be on this song too. Call It Easy starts off pretty soft and quiet, and while I do love the way that it does eventually go into a much bigger sounding chorus, I think overall I just find myself being quite unprepared for such a massive sound change, just given the lack of any kind of tension building or anything like that during the intro, with it just never really alluding to any sort of climax later in the song. But despite that, the actual climax itself is absolutely a brilliant moment, definitely coming through with one of the most euphoric sounding parts on the album. And I also do actually quite like just how short and brief the climax is as well, just really making you appreciate it while it's there, before the track then goes into a very slow and long outro. And then just towards the end, I love the very heavy jazz influence, just with the very chaotic and in a sense almost dissonant saxophone that's going on. Outlast, I think, is a song with one of the most unique structures on the album, with it opening again with that just very straightforward tension building climax. But then instead of building up to anything bigger, it just continues teasing you with these various different sections that the song goes in and out of, with each one being absolutely fantastic and just completely subverting expectations too. And I think that each one just has an emphasis on something different, and I think they're all incredible for that. Whether it's just the fantastic vocal delivery, the beautifully soft guitar playing, or just the very good atmosphere towards the end, I just love every single different moment and style that this song explores, and I think definitely makes it one of the most unique and unpredictable moments on the whole project. And then nearing the end of the album, you have the song Sayburn, which is just another one of those rare moments that tones down the big epic climaxes, and instead shows off the band's ability to do an incredible job at pulling off just a more simple acoustic guitar-based song, with this one also having a massive emphasis more on the vocals, which I also really like. Just because as consistent as the vocals have been throughout the album, I think that they've always just been a little bit overshadowed by all of the other insanity that's going on around them. So I just really like that the album gives you this song towards the end, and just gives you a moment to really appreciate how incredible the vocals are without having any sort of distraction from them. And then you have Your Old Place, which does kind of keep that vibe for its intro, but then does start progressing in a much more traditionally progressive way, as opposed to the much more immediate and unpredictable climaxes that we've seen so far on the album. And I really think that this song just does an incredible job at being the closer, as I just find it so easy to get lost in the brilliant and immersive atmosphere that it creates. Again, with just the sheer passion of just about every element of the song not letting up for pretty much the whole thing. And so I'm just really glad to see this band already on their second album, just creating a much more focused and fully actualized version of the vision they had on their debut, with this one just being so much more consistent and passionate and just generally all around creative, with their influences still in a way being quite obvious. But like I said, they still managed to make their sound so distinct and unique. And I just love how this band still managed to have their own unique sound to them, which I really hope that on future projects they will only manage to refine more and more. And so for that reason, I'll be giving this album a 9 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.